They didn't say it on television. They said it quietly on the sideline, between breaths, like a fact too obvious to argue with.
You don't have 92 yards. 2 minutes left. No timeouts. The Super Bowl slipping away 1 second at a time.
Across the field stood the Cincinnati Bengals defense, fresh, confident, already tasting the ending. They weren't celebrating yet, but they were preparing for it. Helmets adjusted, gloves tightened, eyes locked on one man. Joe Montana. He stood near the bench, helmet on, chin strap loose, not pacing, not hyping anyone up, just listening. The noise inside the stadium was deafening, but around him, in that small pocket of reality, the message was clear. This drive was unrealistic. This drive was unlikely. This drive was supposed to fail. 92 yards is not a march, it's a sentence. Most quarterbacks hear that number and feel the weight of it crush their chest. The math, the margin, the clock, every mistake magnified, every incompletion fatal. Joe Montana heard it and felt nothing. No spike in heart rate, no rush of panic, no tightening in his shoulders, just clarity. He looked at the field, not like a battlefield, but like a map. Not 92 yards, just one decision at a time, one defender at a time, one breath at a time. A teammate leaned in close, trying to sound confident, failing. Let's just get something started. Montana nodded, almost politely. That was the thing about him. When everyone else felt urgency, he felt patience. When everyone else felt pressure, he felt space. The huddle formed. 11 men leaned in, helmets touching, sweat dripping, legs heavy. These were veterans, champions, men who had been here before, and still, even they were searching Montana's eyes for something. Reassurance, fire, anything. Montana looked at them calmly and said nothing dramatic. No speech, no promise, no miracle talk, just the play call. And when he broke the huddle, something subtle happened. Something the cameras didn't catch, but defenders did. He smiled, not a grin, not arrogance, a quiet, almost bored smile. On the Bengals sideline, a linebacker noticed it and frowned. Quarterbacks don't smile here. The ball was snapped. First play, short gain, nothing special, just enough to breathe. Montana popped up immediately, clapped his hands, already calling the next play. No celebration, no wasted motion. Second play, another completion. Chains move, the clock keeps running. The stadium noise shifted, not louder, not quieter, but sharper, like people were leaning forward without realizing it. On the sideline, a coach muttered, "He's too calm." That calm was contagious. Receivers stopped rushing their routes. Linemen settled into rhythm. Even the defense felt it, the unsettling sense that time was not on their side anymore. Montana wasn't throwing hard. He wasn't forcing windows. He was placing the ball exactly where it needed to be, as if the field itself was cooperating. 10 yards, 8 yards, 7. The clock dipped under a minute. Now the math screamed again. Too far. Too late. Then came the moment no one forgets. As the offense hurried to the line, Montana glanced to the right corner of the end zone, and then past it, up into the stands. "Hey," he said casually, pointing. "Isn't that John Candy?" Some players laughed. Some thought he was joking. Some didn't understand at all. But every defender who heard it felt something cold crawl up their spine. Who talks about celebrities with the Super Bowl on the line? Only someone who isn't afraid of the moment. The ball was snapped again. Pressure collapsed instantly. Defensive linemen broke through, arms reaching, hands grasping at air. Montana rolled right, body twisting, vision narrowing. This was it. This was where drives died. This was where legends cracked. Montana didn't throw immediately. He waited. One extra heartbeat, and in that suspended second, when the entire stadium inhaled, he saw him, a receiver breaking free at the back of the end zone. Montana released the ball, high, arcing, almost careless. For a fraction of a second, it looked wrong. Too high, too soft, too late. Then hands reached up. The catch. Touchdown. The stadium exploded, but Montana didn't. He jogged off the field like it was any other drive, helmet still on, expression unchanged, as if he had simply confirmed what he already knew. 92 yards wasn't a distance. It was a misunderstanding, and Joe Montana had just corrected it. On the sideline, the Bengals stood frozen, helmets off, mouths open, trying to understand how a man could walk into the most impossible situation in football and make it look inevitable. They didn't lose to a play, they lost to a mindset. And that was only the beginning of what that drive would mean. The touchdown didn't end the game. It broke something deeper. On the scoreboard, the numbers changed. On the field, momentum shifted. But inside the Cincinnati Bengals defense, belief fractured. They gathered near their sideline, helmets off, staring back at the field where Joe Montana stood quietly, sipping water, breathing evenly, like a man waiting for a delayed flight. Not the closing seconds of a Super Bowl. Someone muttered, "We gave him too much." Another voice replied, almost angrily, "No, he took it." That distinction mattered. Great quarterbacks beat coverages. Great quarterbacks beat blitzes. Joe Montana beat expectations. The Bengals had done everything right on paper. Tight coverage, smart pressure, conservative clock management. They had forced the scenario every coach dreams of. No timeouts, 90-plus yards, maximum pressure. And Montana had walked through it as if pressure was optional. When the Bengals offense returned to the field, they weren't facing a defense anymore. They were facing time. And time suddenly felt hostile. The plays came slower. The sideline felt tighter. Every decision carried weight it hadn't carried minutes earlier. That's what Montana did to teams. He didn't dominate them physically. He compressed their margin for error. A short completion, a stop, the clock running. The Bengals had one more chance. They moved the ball just enough to give themselves hope, but not comfort. The field goal unit came out. Everything rested on one kick, one controlled swing of the leg. The stadium went quiet again, but this time the silence was different. This wasn't anticipation. This was negotiation with fate. The kick went up, wide, not dramatically, not crushingly, just wide enough. The clock expired, and just like that it was over. On paper it would be recorded as a comeback drive. In highlight reels it would be remembered for the pass. In statistics it would be one more Super Bowl win. But for the men on that field, it was something else entirely. They had just witnessed a man operate outside the emotional rules of the sport. While others tightened, he loosened. While others rushed, he waited. While others felt urgency, he felt control. In the post-game chaos, reporters swarmed, microphones pushed forward. Questions overlapped. How did you stay so calm? Did you know you'd score? What were you thinking on that last throw? Montana shrugged. We just ran the offense. That answer frustrated people. They wanted drama. They wanted genius explained. But the truth was harder to package. Joe Montana didn't rise to the moment. He removed the moment from the equation. In the locker room, teammates replayed the drive aloud, each recalling a detail the others had missed. The way he looked at the huddle, the smile before the snap, that thing he said about John Candy. They laughed now, but there was awe under it, because they knew something the rest of the world was just beginning to understand. They were playing with a quarterback who could bend the emotional gravity of the game. Coaches around the league would spend years trying to teach composure under pressure. They'd show film, they'd use buzzwords, they'd design drills. But you can't manufacture what Montana had. You either trust the moment, or the moment owns you. Defensive coordinators studied that drive obsessively. They slowed it down frame by frame, looking for tells. They found none. No panic, no forced throws, no heroic desperation, just decisions, one after another, correct, inevitable. By the next season, the reputation had already spread. If Joe Montana had the ball late, the game wasn't over. It was decided, and opponents knew it. They'd say it publicly, confident, defiant, but privately, they prepared differently. They tightened rotations. They shortened play calls. They pressed just a little too hard, because nothing unnerves a defense like a quarterback who isn't afraid of failure. That Super Bowl drive didn't just win a championship. It changed how endings felt. From then on, when Joe Montana stepped onto the field in the final minutes, something invisible but undeniable followed him. Silence on opposing sidelines, hesitation in defensive eyes, and a creeping realization. The clock wasn't his enemy, it was his ally. Long after the confetti was swept away, long after the interviews ended, and the lockers emptied, that drive kept replaying, not on screens, but in minds. Opposing coaches watched it alone in dark rooms. Quarterbacks watched it and felt equal parts admiration and discomfort. Defenders watched it and remembered the feeling they couldn't name while it was happening. The feeling that the game had slipped out of their control before the score ever changed. That was the real legacy of those 92 yards. It wasn't the distance. It wasn't the pass. It wasn't even the championship. It was the realization that pressure, football's most reliable weapon, didn't work on one man, Joe Montana. From that night forward, Joe Montana wasn't just a quarterback you respected. He was a quarterback you prepared differently for. Defensive meetings changed tone when his name came up. We can't let it come down to the end. We need to finish early. We can't give him a chance, because a chance meant something else with him. Against most quarterbacks, late-game pressure caused mistakes. Against Montana, it caused defenders to rush assignments, to overcommit, to guess. He never baited them verbally. He never stared them down. He simply let them feel the clock, and when they tightened, he loosened. What made it worse for everyone else was how ordinary he made it look. No dramatic fist pumps, no chest pounding, no speeches about destiny, just execution. Years later, when analysts tried to explain it, they used phrases like ice in his veins and clutch gene. Montana never liked those terms. They sounded mystical, unreachable. The truth was simpler and more uncomfortable. Joe Montana trusted preparation more than adrenaline. He had run those plays thousands of times. He had seen those coverages in his sleep. He didn't need the moment to elevate him. The moment needed to keep up. Teammates would later say the same thing. When the pressure peaked, Montana's voice actually got softer, not quieter, calmer. In huddles, he didn't speed up. He slowed everything down. He made the field feel smaller, manageable. That calm wasn't passive. It was deliberate, and it did something profound. It made chaos feel optional. That Super Bowl drive became a reference point, not just for fans, but for the sport itself. Whenever another quarterback
quarterback attempted a late-game comeback. The comparison came immediately. Montana-esque. Montana territory. Does he have Montana in him? And most didn't. Not because they weren't talented, not because they weren't tough, but because pressure doesn't test skill first, it tests identity. Montana's identity never wavered. He didn't see himself as the hero of the ending. He saw himself as the steward of process. That's why the John Candy moment mattered more than people realized. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't arrogance. It was proof. Proof that the game hadn't invaded his mind. Proof that the moment hadn't hijacked his breathing. Proof that he was still himself when others stopped being. Defenders felt that instinctively. They could see it in his posture, in the way he reset after each snap, in the absence of urgency where urgency should have lived. And that absence became terrifying, because if the quarterback wasn't afraid, maybe he knew something they didn't. That's how pressure stopped working. Not through bravado, not through dominance, through neutrality. Over time, the legend grew, but the man remained unchanged. Montana never claimed that drive was special. He never elevated it above the others. To him, it was simply the offense working under constraint. To everyone else, it was a lesson they couldn't quite absorb, that football is not always won by the strongest arm, or the fastest legs, or the loudest confidence. Sometimes it's won by the quietest mind. That Super Bowl didn't just crown a champion. It exposed a truth that would haunt opponents for a decade. If you let Joe Montana hang around, if you let him breathe, if you let the game come down to him, you had already lost, not on the scoreboard, but inside yourself. And that is why, years later, long after the jerseys were retired and the debates settled, players who faced him still speak carefully when his name comes up. Not bitterly, not angrily, respectfully, because they remember the feeling that the game was still alive, until Joe Montana decided it wasn't. And when he did, there was nothing left to argue, only silence. The silence that followed those moments wasn't empty, it was heavy. Years later, former defenders would admit something they never said at the time. They knew the drive was over before the final throw. Not logically, not strategically, emotionally. They felt it in the way Montana walked back to the huddle, in the way he never looked at the clock twice, in the way his cadence never changed. Pressure usually accelerates men. It speeds their thoughts. It fractures their focus. But Montana slowed the world around him, and when the world slows down for one person and one person alone, everyone else feels late. That's why his legacy isn't just measured in rings or records. Those can be counted. Those can be debated. What can't be debated is this: he changed how endings felt. Before him, the final minutes were chaos. After him, they became calculation. Before him, defenses hoped. After him, they hurried. And in that hurry, in that subtle panic, games were lost. Long after the stadium lights dimmed, long after that Super Bowl faded into history, quarterbacks would still chase the same thing Montana already possessed: control without tension, confidence without noise, greatness without force. Very few ever found it, because what Joe Montana showed the world in those final minutes was not how to beat the clock, but how to make it irrelevant.